Asterisk, she thought walking away was the only option. The fights, the loneliness, the weight of a broken marriage. It was too much. So, Jessica Carter packed her bags, kissed her 6-year-old daughter goodbye, and left her Marine husband behind. But 1 year later, a single phone call shattered everything she thought she knew. What happened next will leave you speechless. Asterisk. Before we dive into this emotional journey, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and hit the notification bell. Stories like this remind us of the power of second chances. Don't miss what happens next. The breaking point. The rain fell in heavy sheets against a small military housing unit in San Diego, the rhythmic tapping against the windows the only sound in the otherwise suffocating silence. Jessica Carter stood in the dimly lit bedroom, her hands trembling as she zipped up the last of her suitcases. The weight of the moment pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Across the room, her husband, Sergeant Daniel Carter, sat on the edge of their bed, his broad shoulders slumped forward, his gaze fixed on the floor. His uniform, usually crisp and immaculate, was wrinkled, the sleeves rolled up haphazardly as if he'd given up on maintaining appearances. The man who had once looked at her with warmth and love now felt like a stranger, distant, hardened by war, and utterly unreachable. Jessica swallowed hard, forcing the lump in her throat down. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm outside. Daniel didn't respond. He didn't even look up. The silence was worse than any argument. At least anger would have meant he still cared enough to fight. But this was surrender. A soft whimper came from the doorway. Jessica turned to see their 6-year-old daughter, Lily, clutching her worn-out teddy bear, her big brown eyes filled with tears she was too young to understand. "Mommy?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. Jessica's heart shattered. She knelt down, pulling Lily into a tight hug, inhaling the familiar scent of baby shampoo and crayons. "I love you, sweetheart," she murmured against her daughter's hair. More than anything, Lily clung to her, tiny fingers digging into her shirt. "Don't go," she pleaded. Jessica closed her eyes, fighting back another wave of tears. How could she explain that staying would break her just as much as leaving? That every day in this house felt like drowning in memories of what they used to be, before the deployments, before the nightmares, before the distance that had grown between them like an uncrossable ocean. She pulled away gently, pressing a kiss to Lily's forehead before standing. Daniel still hadn't moved. "Are you really just going to sit there?" Jessica asked, her voice cracking. Daniel finally lifted his head, his dark eyes hollow. "What do you want me to say, Jess?" His voice was rough, exhausted. "You've already made up your mind." The resignation in his tone cut deeper than any accusation. He wasn't going to stop her. He wasn't going to fight for her. Jessica grabbed her suitcase, the wheels clicking against the hardwood floor as she walked toward the door. She hesitated for just a second, her hand on the knob, waiting, hoping for him to say something, anything that would make her stay. But the only sound was Lily's quiet crying. She stepped out into the storm, the rain soaking through her clothes within seconds, mixing with the tears on her face. The car door slammed behind her, the engine roaring to life as she pulled away from the only home she'd known for the past 8 years. In the rear-view mirror, she caught one last glimpse of Lily's small figure in the doorway, her tiny hand raised in a hesitant wave. Jessica pressed her foot harder on the gas, as the speed could outrun the guilt already clawing at her chest. She told herself it was for the best, that Lily deserved better than a broken home, that Daniel would be better off without her. But as the miles stretched between them, the weight of what she'd done settled over her like a shroud. What Jessica didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Daniel had been keeping a secret, one that would change everything. Just hours before she left, he had received a phone call, a diagnosis. And now, as she drove further away, he sat alone in the empty house, stared at the medical report in his hands, the words PTSD and severe depression glaring back at him. He had wanted to tell her. He had planned to. But now it was too late. A year of regret. The apartment in Portland was small, smaller than any place Jessica had ever lived. A single window overlooked a busy street, The constant hum of traffic, a poor substitute for the quiet nights she used to spend listening to the ocean back in San Diego. The walls were bare, save for a single-frame photo of Lily tucked away on the nightstand, face down most days because looking at her hurt too much. 12 months. That's how long it had been since she walked out. 12 months of silence from Daniel. 12 months of missed birthdays and empty holidays. 12 months of waking up in the middle of the night, reaching for a child who wasn't there. Jessica sat on the edge of her bed, a half-empty bottle of wine on the nightstand beside her. She had promised herself she wouldn't drink tonight, but the ache in her chest had other plans. The first sip burned, the second numbed, and by the third, she barely tasted it all. Her phone buzzed beside her, the screen lighting up with an unfamiliar number. Normally, she would have ignored it. Telemarketers, wrong numbers, they were all the same. But something made her hesitate. A whisper of intuition, a prickle at the back of her neck. She picked it up. Ms. Carter? The voice on the other end was professional. Clipped. Jessica's fingers tightened around the phone. Yes. This is Marissa Torres from Child Protective Services. I'm calling regarding your daughter, Lily. The world tilted. Jessica's breath caught in her throat, her heart slamming against her ribs. What about her? Is she okay? There was a pause, too long, too heavy. Ms. Carter, your daughter has been placed in temporary foster care. There was an incident involving your husband. The words hit like a physical blow. Jessica's stomach twisted, her mind racing. An incident? What did that mean? Was Daniel hurt? Was Lily? What happened? She demanded, her voice shaking. Another pause. I'm not at liberty to discuss details over the phone, but I strongly suggest you return to San Diego as soon as possible. There will be a custody hearing in 72 hours. The line went dead before Jessica could respond. She sat there frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear. The room felt too small, the walls closing in around her. Lily was in foster care. Daniel was, what? Gone? Hurt? Dead? Her hands trembled as she pulled up his number, the one she had sworn she'd never call again. It rang once, twice, then went straight to voicemail. His recorded voice, calm and steady, sent a fresh wave of guilt crashing over her. You've reached Daniel Carter. Leave a message. She hung up without speaking. The next call was to the airline. The earliest flight to San Diego left in 3 hours. Jessica moved on autopilot, throwing clothes into a duffel bag, her mind racing. What had happened in the years she'd been gone? Had Daniel fallen apart without her? Had he hurt Lily? No, that was impossible. Daniel would never lay a hand on their daughter. But then why was she in foster care? The questions gnawed at her as she sped to the airport, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. The rain had started again, a cold, relentless drizzle that blurred the road ahead. By the time she boarded the plane, exhaustion had settled deep into her bones. She stared out the window as the city lights faded beneath her, the weight of her choices pressing down harder with every mile. She had left because she thought it was the only way to survive. But what if she had been wrong? The flight attendant offered her a drink. Jessica declined. For the first time in months, she wanted to feel everything. The fear, the regret, the crushing certainty that she had made the biggest mistake of her life. When the plane landed, she rushed through the terminal, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder. The San Diego air was thick with salt and familiarity, the scent of home hitting her like a punch to the gut. She didn't go to a hotel. She went straight to the house. Their house, the one she had walked away from a year ago. The porch light was off. The front yard, once meticulously kept, was overgrown with weeds. The sight of it made her chest ache. Jessica knocked, then rang the bell. No answer. She tried the handle. Locked. Peering through the front window, she could see the living room was dark, but not empty. Furniture still in place, a few dishes left on the coffee table. Someone had been here recently. A neighbor's curtain twitched across the street. Jessica hesitated, then walked over, knocking on the door. Mrs. Alvarez, the same woman who had watched Lily after school sometimes, answered, her expression hardening when she saw Jessica. You, she said flatly. Jessica swallowed. I need to know what happened. Where's Daniel? Where's Lily? Mrs. Alvarez studied her for a long moment, then sighed. You'd better come inside. The house smelled like cinnamon and coffee. Photos of grandchildren lined the walls. A lifetime of memories that weren't hers. Mrs. Alvarez didn't offer her a seat. Daniel's in the hospital, she said bluntly. He had a breakdown. The police found him wandering the beach at 2 a.m, screaming for people who weren't there. Jessica's knees threatened to buckle. Is he? He's alive, but he's not well. Mrs. Alvarez crossed her arms. Lily's with a foster family. Good people. They'll take care of her until the court decides what's next. Jessica's vision blurred. I didn't know, she whispered. Mrs. Alvarez's gaze was unflinching. You left. You didn't want to know. The truth of it cut deep. Jessica had run from the mess, from the pain, from a man she'd loved and the child she'd carried. And now she had a choice. Walk away again, or fight for what was left of her family. The truth unfolds. Jessica stood frozen in Mrs. Alvarez's living room, the weight of the woman's words pressing down on her like a physical force. You left. You didn't want to know. The accusation hung in the air between them, sharp and undeniable. She opened her mouth to defend herself, to explain that she hadn't known how bad things had gotten. But the excuses died before they could form, because the truth was, she hadn't wanted to know. She had been so consumed by her own pain, her own need to escape, that she hadn't stopped to consider what her absence might do to Daniel. To Lily. Where is he? Jessica asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Which hospital? Mrs. Alvarez studied her for a long moment, as if weighing whether Jessica deserved the answer. Finally, she sighed. Naval Medical Center. Psychiatric ward. Jessica's stomach twisted. The psychiatric ward. Daniel, who had always been so strong, so steady, locked away like he was broken beyond repair. She turned toward the door, her mind already racing with what she would say to him, how she could possibly begin to make this right. But Mrs. Alvarez's voice stopped her. You should know, Lily's not the same. Jessica hesitated, her hand on the doorknob. What do you mean? Mrs. Alvarez's expression softened. Just slightly. She doesn't talk much anymore. Not since Daniel was taken away. The social worker says it's trauma. A fresh wave of guilt crashed over Jessica. Her daughter, her bright, bubbly little girl, had gone silent. Because of her. Because she hadn't been there. She swallowed hard. Where is she staying? The Reyes family. Good people. They live a few blocks from here. Mrs. Alvarez hesitated, then added, She asks for you sometimes. At night. Jessica closed her eyes, fighting back tears. She couldn't fall apart now. Not when Lily needed her. Not when Daniel might, too. She stepped out into the cool evening air. The sky streaked with the last remnants of sunset. The hospital was her first stop. She needed to see Daniel, to understand what had happened to him, to their family. In the years she'd been gone, the Naval Medical Center loomed before her, its sterile white walls a stark contrast to the chaos churning inside her. The receptionist directed her to the psychiatric wing, where a nurse eyed her with cautious skepticism. Are you family? The nurse asked. Jessica hesitated. I'm his wife. The lie slipped out easily. Technically, they were still married. Divorce papers had never been filed. But it felt strange to claim the title after walking away from it. The nurse led her down a quiet hallway, the scent of antiseptic heavy in the air. When they reached Daniel's room, she paused. He's been unstable. If he becomes agitated, we'll need you to leave. Jessica nodded, her pulse quickening as the nurse opened the door. The room was small, dimly lit. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, his back to the door, staring blankly at the wall. He was thinner than she remembered, his shoulders hunched, his hair longer and unkempt. The tattoos that had once marked him as a proud Marine, the eagle, globe, and anchor on his forearm, now seemed faded, like they belonged to a different man. Daniel. He didn't turn. She stepped closer, her heart hammering. It's me. Jessica. For a long moment, there was no reaction. Then, slowly he turned his head. His eyes, once so full of life, were hollow, haunted. You're not real, he muttered. The words cut deep. I am, she said softly. I'm here. He blinked, as if trying to focus. Then something flickered in his gaze. Recognition, followed by a flash of anger. You left. There was no accusation in his tone, just a simple, brutal statement of fact. Jessica's throat tightened. I know, and I'm sorry. Daniel let out a harsh laugh, shaking his head. Sorry doesn't bring her back. Her breath caught. Bring who back? His expression darkened, his hands clenching into fists. Lily, they took her. They took her because of me. Jessica's stomach dropped. Daniel, Lily's not. She's not gone. She's in foster care, but she's okay. We can get her back. He stared at her, his eyes searching hers for the truth. Then, just as quickly as the clarity had come, it slipped away. His gaze grew distant again, his voice dropping to a whisper. They're in the walls. Jessica's blood ran cold. Who is? Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he reached under his pillow and pulled out a folded piece of paper, thrusting it toward her. Take it, he said urgently, before they find it. Jessica unfolded the paper with trembling hands. It was a letter, scrawled in Daniel's messy handwriting, the ink smudged in places like it had been written in a hurry. If you're reading this, I failed. But Lily needs you now. Please don't let her down again. Her vision blurred. At the bottom of the page, beneath his signature, was another line, one that sent a chill down her spine. They're watching. Trust no one. Jessica looked up, her mind racing. Daniel, what is this? Who's watching? But he had already retreated back into himself, his gaze fixed on something only he could see. The nurse appeared in the doorway, her expression apologetic. I'm sorry, but visiting hours are over. Jessica hesitated, clutching the letter. She wanted to demand answers, to shake Daniel until the man she knew came back. But the broken figure in front of her was a stranger. She leaned forward, pressing a kiss to his forehead. I'll fix this, she whispered. Then she turned and walked out, the weight of his words burning in her chest. Trust no one. But first, she needed to see Lily, facing the consequences. The Reyes family lived in a modest blue house with a neatly trimmed lawn and a child's bicycle overturned near the porch. Jessica stood at the front door, her hand hovering over the knocker, her pulse pounding in her ears. What would she say to Lily after all this time? How could she possibly explain why she had left, why she had stayed away for so long? Before she could second-guess herself, the door swung open. A woman in her late 40s stood there, her dark hair pulled into a tight bun, her sharp eyes assessing Jessica with quiet suspicion. Can I help you? Jessica swallowed. I'm Jessica Carter, Lily's mother. The woman's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Mrs. Reyes, she said by way of introduction. She didn't invite Jessica inside. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, the weight of unspoken judgment hanging between them. Finally, Jessica broke the silence. I'd like to see my daughter. Mrs. Reyes crossed her arms. Do you have permission from CPS? Jessica's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. Not yet, but I just got back into town. I'm working on it. Mrs. Reyes exhaled through her nose, her gaze flickering toward the staircase behind her. Lily's in her room. She doesn't like surprises. The words were a warning. You are a surprise. You are the disruption. Jessica forced herself to nod. I understand. But please, just let me see her. Even if it's just for a minute. Mrs. Reyes hesitated, then stepped aside with obvious reluctance. 5 minutes. And if she gets upset, you leave. Jessica barely had time to agree before the woman turned and led her up the stairs. The house smelled like warm bread and laundry detergent, so different from the sterile, masculine scent of the home she'd shared with Daniel. At the end of the hallway, Mrs. Reyes stopped in front of a closed door adorned with a handmade sign, Lily's room in bright, uneven letters. She knocked softly. Lily, you have a visitor. No response. Mrs. Reyes opened the door, just enough to peer inside. Sweetheart, someone's here to see you. A beat of silence. Then a small, hesitant voice. Who? Jessica's breath caught at the sound. It was Lily's voice, but quieter, flatter. like a shadow of the child she remembered. Mrs. Reyes glanced at Jessica, then back at the door. "It's your mom." Silence. Then, so soft Jessica almost missed it. "No." The single word was a knife to the chest. Jessica stepped forward before she could stop herself, pushing the door open wider. Lily sat on the floor in the corner of the room, her back against the wall, her knees pulled to her chest. She was smaller than Jessica remembered, her hair longer, her face thinner. And her eyes, those big brown eyes that had once sparkled with mischief, were dull, wary. "Hey, baby," Jessica whispered, her voice breaking. Lily didn't move, didn't smile, just stared. Mrs. Reyes cleared her throat. "I'll give you 2 minutes." She stepped out, closing the door behind her, but not all the way. A deliberate choice. Jessica knelt on the floor, keeping her distance. She wanted to sweep Lily into her arms, to hold her and never let go, but the way her daughter looked at her, like she was a stranger, kept her frozen in place. "I missed you," Jessica said softly. Lily's fingers twisted in the fabric of her shirt. "You left." No anger, no tears, just a simple, devastating fact. Jessica's throat burned. "I know, and I'm so sorry." Lily didn't respond. She just kept staring, her gaze flickering over Jessica's face as if searching for something familiar. Jessica reached into her bag and pulled out the stuffed bear Lily had loved since she was a baby, the one she left behind when she fled. "I brought Mr. Bubbles," she said, holding it out. For the first time, Lily's expression flickered. She reached the bear, her small fingers brushing against Jessica's for just a second before pulling back. She tucked the toy under her chin, the way she always used when she was tired or scared. Jessica's eyes welled with tears. "Do you remember when we used to have picnics in the backyard? You always made me eat the crusts of your sandwiches." A tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Jessica smiled through her tears. "And remember how Daddy would pretend to be a monster and chase us around the house?" Lily's grip on the bear tightened. "Daddy's sick," she whispered. Jessica's heart clenched. "I know, sweetheart, but he's going to get better." Lily shook her head. "He sees bad men." A chill ran down Jessica's spine. "What bad men?" Lily didn't answer. Instead, she reached under her pillow and pulled out a folded piece of construction paper, handing it to Jessica. Jessica unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing, a crude but unmistakable sketch of a man in a uniform lying on the ground, surrounded by shadowy figures with red eyes. At the top, in shaky letters, Lily had written, "Daddy's Nightmares." Jessica's hands trembled. This wasn't just a child's drawing. It was a glimpse into Daniel's unraveling mind, into the horrors he'd brought home with him from war. Before she could say anything, the door creaked open. Mrs. Reyes stood there, her arms crossed. "Time's up." Jessica hesitated, then handed the drawing back to Lily. "I'll come see you again soon, okay?" Lily didn't respond. She just clutched Mr. Bubbles tighter, her eyes downcast. Jessica stood, her legs unsteady. As she followed Mrs. Reyes back downstairs, the woman turned to her, her voice low but firm. "You left," she said bluntly. "What makes you think you can just come back?" Jessica met her gaze. "Because she's my daughter." Mrs. Reyes studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "The court hearing is in 2 days. If you want any chance of getting her back, you'd better be ready to prove you're not going to disappear again." Jessica nodded, her resolve hardening. She had failed Daniel. She had failed Lily. But she wouldn't fail them again. As she stepped out into the fading sunlight, her phone buzzed in her pocket. An unknown number. She answered, her voice wary. "Hello." A man's voice, low and urgent. "You need to stop digging into Daniel's past. For your daughter's sake." The line went dead. Jessica stood frozen on the sidewalk, the warning ringing in her ears. Trust no one. Daniel's words suddenly felt less like paranoia and more like a lifeline. The search begins. The anonymous call left Jessica standing rigid on the sidewalk, her fingers clenched around her phone. The voice had been calm, deliberate, not a threat, but a warning. A warning that told her one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever had happened to Daniel wasn't just PTSD. It was something darker, Something someone didn't want her to uncover. She glanced back at the Reyes house, where Lily sat in silence with a drawing of monsters under her bed. Then she turned and walked briskly to her car, her mind racing. She needed answers, and she knew exactly where to start. The bar was exactly as Daniel had described it in the rare moments he talked about his time before deployment, dim, sticky-floored, and filled with off-duty Marines. The Brass Anchor was the kind of place where men want to drink away memories they'd rather forget. Jessica hesitated at the entrance, scanning the room. Then she spotted him, Ramirez, Daniel's closest friend in the unit, the one who had stood beside him at their wedding. He sat alone at the far end of the bar, a half-empty beer in front of him, his posture tense even in relaxation. She approached slowly, sliding onto the stool beside him. Ramirez didn't look up. "You're not my usual type," he muttered into his drink. "Good," Jessica said, "because I'm here about Daniel." At that, Ramirez stiffened. His head turned just enough for her to see the fresh scar along his jawline, a wound that hadn't been there a year ago. His dark eyes flickered over her face, recognition dawning, followed by something colder. "You shouldn't be here." Jessica held his gaze. "Tell me what happened to him." Ramirez exhaled sharply, glancing around the bar before leaning in. "Not here." He tossed cash on the counter and stood, jerking his head toward the back door. Jessica followed him into the alley behind the bar, the smell of salt and garbage thick in the air. The moment the door shut behind them, Ramirez rounded on her. "You walked out," he said, his voice low and furious. "You left him alone to deal with that hell. And now you want answers." Jessica didn't flinch. "I didn't know. You didn't ask." The accusation stung because it was true. She had been so focused on her own pain that she hadn't stopped to consider Daniel's. "Not really. What happened over there?" she pressed. Ramirez hesitated, then ran a hand over his face. "Our last mission went bad. Not just bad, wrong. Command said it was routine intel gathering, but when we got to the village..." His jaw tightened. There were civilians. Kids. Jessica's stomach dropped. Ramirez looked away, his voice dropping to a whisper. Daniel refused the order. He stood between our unit and a family hiding in one of the houses. Told the lieutenant we weren't doing it. Jessica's breath caught. That was the Daniel she knew, the man who would rather break the rules than break his morals. "What happened?" Ramirez's expression darkened. "They pulled him off the field. Court-martialed him for insubordination. But that wasn't the worst part." He leaned closer. After they shipped him back, he started asking questions, digging into why we were really there. And then what? Ramirez's eyes darted past her, scanning the alley. He changed, said he was being watched, started carrying a knife everywhere. Last time I saw him, he was convinced someone had planted something in his house. Jessica's mind flashed to Lily's drawing. The shadowy figures with red eyes. Not just nightmares. Paranoia. Who would do that to him? Ramirez shook his head. "You don't get it. This isn't just some grudge. The things he was looking into." A sudden noise from the street cut him off. His hand shot out, gripping her arm. "You need to leave. Now." "Why?" "Because they're watching," he hissed, echoing Daniel's warning. "And if they think you know anything." Headlights cut through the alley as a black SUV rolled to a stop at the entrance. Ramirez shoved Jessica toward the opposite end of the alley. "Go, and don't contact me again." She didn't argue. She ran. The sound of car doors slamming echoed behind her as she rounded the corner, her heart pounding. She didn't stop until she was 3 blocks away, ducking into a crowded diner to catch her breath. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone. She needed proof. Something concrete to tie Daniel's breakdown to his last mission, and she knew where to find it. The military housing unit was dark when she returned, the key she kept all this time still fitting smoothly into the lock. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and neglect. Jessica moved quickly, her phone's flashlight cutting through the gloom. Daniel's journals had to be here somewhere. If he'd been digging into something, he would have written it down. She started in his office, the one room she'd rarely enter when they were together. The desk was littered with papers, Maps with circles and question marks scribbled in the margins, but no journal. Then she noticed it. A loose floorboard beneath the desk, barely visible unless you were looking for it. She pried it up with trembling fingers. Beneath it lay a leather-bound notebook. Jessica flipped it open, her pulse roaring in her ears as she scanned the pages. Dates, coordinates, names she didn't recognize. And in the center of it all, one phrase underlined over and over: Operation Red Sands. A mission that didn't exist. A sharp click from the front door made her freeze. Someone was inside. Jessica snapped the journal shut, shoving it into her jacket as footsteps creaked down the hallway. She had seconds to decide: hide or run. Then the office door swung open. A man in military fatigue stood there, his face obscured by shadows. "Jessica Carter," he said calmly, "you're holding something that doesn't belong to you." Her grip tightened on the journal, and she ran straight at him. The element of surprise was all she had. She barreled into him, knocking him off balance just enough to slip past, sprinting for the back door. Shouts followed her as she burst into the night. The journal pressed against her chest like a lifeline. She didn't stop running until she was 6 blocks away, crouched behind a dumpster, gasping for air. Then, with shaking hands, she opened the journal again to the last page Daniel had written. "If you're reading this, they found me. Tell Ramirez to check the storage unit. The proof is there. And Jessica," the final line made her blood run cold, "don't trust anyone in uniform." A shocking discovery. The journal trembled in Jessica's hands as she crouched behind the dumpster, the distant sound of pursuit still echoing in her ears. Daniel's last words burned into her mind. Don't trust anyone in uniform. She snapped the journal shut and forced herself to breathe. She needed to move. The storage unit. That's where the answers were. But first, she had to get off the streets. The motel room was a dingy, pay-by-the-hour place near the highway, the kind where no one asked questions. Jessica locked the door behind her and immediately shoved the dresser in front of it, her hands still shaking. She flipped open the journal again, this time under the dim yellow light of the bedside lamp. Page after page was filled with Daniel's frantic handwriting. Dates, coordinates, names of high-ranking officers she didn't recognize. And always, circled in red ink, Operation Red Sands. She turned to the last entry, the one that had been interrupted mid-sentence. "If you're reading this, they found me. Tell Ramirez to check the storage unit. The proof is there. And Jessica." The next page was torn out. Jessica cursed under her breath. What proof? Which storage unit? The journal gave no clues. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, making her jump. An unknown number. Again, she hesitated, then answered. No voice this time, just the sound of breathing. Then a whisper, "Unit 214. The line went dead. Jessica stared at the phone. Unit 214. That had to be the storage unit. But who had just told her? And why? She had no choice but to follow the lead. The storage facility was on the outskirts of town, a sprawling maze of identical metal units under the sickly glow of fluorescent lights. Jessica parked a block away and approached on foot, her head pulled low over her face. Unit 214 was at the far end, partially hidden in shadow. The padlock was thick and rusted, but when she tugged it, it fell open in her hands, already broken. Her pulse pounded as she lifted the rolling door, just enough to slip inside. The unit was small, barely larger than a closet, and filled with stacked boxes. A thin layer of dust covered everything, except for one box near the back, its lid slightly ajar, the dust disturbed. Someone had been here recently. Jessica moved toward it, her footsteps muffled by the concrete floor. The box was unmarked, but when she lifted the lid, her breath caught. Inside were files, dozens of them, and on top, a single photograph. A group of soldiers standing in front of a village, their faces grim. Daniel was among them, his expression hollow. Beneath the photo, a document stamped classified in bold red letters. Jessica flipped it open, her eyes scanning the contents. Operation Red Sands. Authorization for experimental combat stimulant testing on deployed personnel. Her stomach twisted. Experimental drugs? Tested on soldiers? She dug deeper, her horror growing with each page. The drug, codenamed Red Sands, was designed to enhance aggression and suppress fear in combat situations. But the side effects were catastrophic. Paranoia, hallucinations, violent outbursts. And the worst part? Test subjects were not informed. Jessica's hands shook as she reached the final page, a list of names. Daniels was near the top. This was what had broken him. This was why he saw enemies where there were none. They had turned him into a lab rat. A noise outside made her freeze. The crunch of gravel underfoot. Someone was coming. Jessica shoved the files into her bag and turned toward the door just as the rolling metal rattled, lifting with a screech. A figure stood silhouetted in the dim light. Ramirez. His face was pale, his eyes wide with panic. "You shouldn't be here," he hissed. Jessica didn't lower the file in her hands. "You knew." Ramirez stepped inside, letting the door clang shut behind him. "I tried to stop it, but once you're in, there's no way out." Jessica's grip tightened on the papers. "You let them do this to him." "I didn't have a choice." Ramirez's voice cracked. "They threatened my family, just like they're going to threaten yours if you don't walk away right now." Jessica's blood ran cold. "Lily." Ramirez nodded grimly. "They're watching her. They're watching you. And if they think you know too much." A gunshot rang out, deafening in the confined space. Ramirez staggered forward, a dark stain spreading across his chest. Jessica screamed as he collapsed, his body hitting the concrete with a sickening thud. Footsteps approached outside, slow, deliberate. She had seconds to react. Grabbing the files, she bolted for the back wall, where a small ventilation grate offered the only escape. Another gunshot. The bullet ricocheted off the metal beside her head as she pried the grate open, squeezing through just as the storage unit door flew open. She didn't look back. She ran, the weight of the files heavy in her bag, Ramirez's blood still warm on her hands. They had tried to silence Daniel. Now they were coming for her. And the only thing standing between them and Lily was a stack of papers that could bring the whole operation crashing down. But first, she had to stay alive long enough to use them. Fight or flight. The night air burned Jessica's lungs as she sprinted to the maze of storage units, her bag slamming against her hip with every step. The files inside, the proof of what they'd done to Daniel, felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. Behind her, shouts echoed through the darkness. They were still chasing her. She ducked between two rows of units, pressing herself against the cold metal as footsteps pounded past. Her hands were sticky, Ramirez's blood. The image of him collapsing replayed in her mind, his warning ringing in her ears. They're watching Lily. She couldn't go to the police. Not if people in uniform were involved. She needed help. Her phone was in her hand before she realized it, her fingers dialing the only person she could think of, Mrs. Alvarez. The woman answered on the second ring, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" Jessica's breath came in ragged gasps. "They killed Ramirez." A beat of silence. Then lower. "Where are you?" "Near the old shipyard. I have proof about what they did to Daniel. About why he—" A flashlight beam cut across the alley between units. Jessica froze. "Jessica?" Mrs. Alvarez's voice was tense. "I have to go." She hung up before the woman could respond, slipping the phone into her pocket as she crouched lower. The beam swept closer. Jessica held her breath. Then, a crash from the opposite end of the facility. The flashlight swung away, the footsteps following the noise. She didn't wait. She ran. The bus station was nearly empty at this hour, just a few weary travelers dozing on plastic chairs. Jessica kept her hood up, her face turned away from the security cameras, as she bought a ticket to the next town over with cash. She couldn't stay in San Diego. Not now, but she couldn't leave Lily either. The bus wouldn't leave for another 30 minutes. Jessica locked herself in a bathroom stall, her hands shaking as she pulled out the files. She needed to understand exactly what she was dealing with. Operation Red Sands. The document spelled out in cold, clinical terms. An experimental drug designed to enhance combat performance, tested on Marines without their knowledge during deployment. Daniel's unit had been given it, forced to take it. if the reports were accurate. The side effects were worse than she'd thought. Paranoia, hallucinations, increased aggression, and, in some cases, total psychological breakdown. Daniel hadn't just been struggling with PTSD. He'd been poisoned. Jessica's stomach twisted. She flipped to the last page, a list of names. Not just Daniel's. Other Marines. Other families. They all deserved to know. She took out her phone again, snapping photos of every page. Then she hesitated, her thumb hovering over the screen. Who could she send them to? The answer came to her in a flash. The journalist. Months ago, back when Daniel first started acting erratically, she'd seen an article about military cover-ups. The reporter, Elena Mendez, had been relentless in her investigations. If anyone would believe this, it was her. Jessica attached the photos to an email, her fingers flying over the screen. You don't know me, but I have proof of an illegal military drug trial. They're killing people to keep it quiet. Please help. She hit send just as the bathroom door creaked open. Jessica stiffened, her hand slipping into her bag, fingers curling around the cold metal of the knife she'd taken from Daniel's house. Footsteps stopped outside her stall. Then a quiet knock. Jessica? Mrs. Alvarez's voice. Jessica exhaled sharply, unlocking the stall door. The older woman stood there, her expression unreadable. How did you find me? Jessica whispered. Mrs. Alvarez held up her phone. You called from the shipyard. The bus station was the closest place to run. She glanced at the files in Jessica's hands. That's the proof. Jessica nodded. Mrs. Alvarez studied her for a long moment. Then, to Jessica's shock, she reached into her purse and pulled out a set of car keys. We need to go. Now. Jessica hesitated. Why are you helping me? Mrs. Alvarez's jaw tightened. Because Lily deserves her father back. That was all Jessica needed to hear. She followed Mrs. Alvarez out of the bus station, keeping her head down as they crossed the parking lot. The older woman's car was an unremarkable sedan, the kind that wouldn't draw attention. Jessica slid into the passenger seat. The files clutched to her chest. Mrs. Alvarez started the engine. Where to? Jessica met her gaze. Somewhere safe. As the car pulled onto the highway, Jessica allowed herself one last look at her phone. The email had been marked as delivered. Now, all she could do was wait, and hope the journalist got the story out before it was too late. Because one thing was certain, they were coming for her. And this time, she wouldn't run. The reckoning. The safe house was a small, nondescript cabin nestled deep in the woods outside San Diego, far enough from the city that no one would stumble upon it by accident. Mrs. Alvarez parked the car beneath a thick canopy of trees, the headlights cutting off as she turned the key. Stay close, she murmured, stepping out into the cool night air. Jessica followed, her bag heavy with the stolen files. The cabin was dark, but Mrs. Alvarez moved with purpose, unlocking the door and ushering her inside. The moment the door shut behind them, the older woman flicked on a single lamp, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Jessica exhaled, her shoulders sagging with exhaustion. How you know about this place? Mrs. Alvarez didn't answer immediately. Instead, she crossed to a small kitchenette and filled a kettle with water. My son was a Marine, she said finally, her back to Jessica. He didn't come home from his last deployment. The weight of the words settled between them. Jessica swallowed hard. I'm sorry. Mrs. Alvarez turned, her dark eyes sharp. Don't be angry. Be furious. Because whatever they did to your husband, they did to my son too. Jessica's grip tightened on the files. She had suspected as much. The list of names in the documents was too long, the pattern too clear. But hearing it confirmed sent a fresh wave of rage through her. She set the files on the table. We have to go public with this. Mrs. Alvarez nodded. But first we make copies, and we get them to someone who can protect them. Jessica thought of the email she'd sent to the journalist. Had Elena Mendez received it? Would she even believe it? The kettle whistled, breaking the silence. Mrs. Alvarez poured 2 cups of tea, sliding one across to Jessica. Drink, then we plan. Jessica wrapped her hands around the warm mug, the heat seeping into her chill fingers. She had just taken her first sip when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Her pulse spiked. Mrs. Alvarez's gaze snapped to her. "Who is it?" Jessica didn't answer. She opened the message. A mutual friend suggested we talk. "Check your email." Elena, the journalist. She'd responded. Jessica quickly pulled up her inbox. There, sitting at the top, was a new message from Elena Mendez. "Your files are explosive, but I need to verify them before I can publish. Meet me tomorrow, 10 a.m. at the Liberty Press building. Come alone." Jessica read the message twice, her mind racing. It could be a trap, or it could be their only chance to expose the truth. She looked up at Mrs. Alvarez. "We have a meeting." The older woman's expression darkened. "It's too dangerous. It's the only way." Mrs. Alvarez studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "Then we go prepared." The next morning, Jessica stood outside the Liberty Press building, her nerves frayed. She'd spent the night memorizing every detail of the files, preparing for the possibility that she might have to recite them from memory if the documents were taken from her. Mrs. Alvarez waited in a car 2 blocks away, ready to intervene if things went wrong. Jessica took a deep breath and pushed through the glass doors. The lobby was quiet, the receptionist barely glancing up as Jessica approached. "I'm here to see Elena Mendez." The woman nodded. 3rd floor. The elevator ride felt endless. When the door slid open, Jessica stepped out into a bustling newsroom, reporters typing furiously at their desks. At the far end of the room, a woman with dark curls and sharp eyes stood, her gaze locking onto Jessica's. Elena Mendez. Jessica crossed the room, her heart pounding. Elena didn't smile. "You're late." Jessica blinked. "The email said 10. "Follow me." Elena turned on her heel, leading Jessica to a small conference room. The moment the door shut behind them, Elena's demeanor changed. "They're watching this building," she said quietly. "We don't have much time." Jessica's stomach dropped. "Then you believe me?" Elena's jaw tightened. "I've been tracking rumors about Red Sands for months. Your files confirm everything." She reached into her bag and pulled out a recorder. "Tell me everything. From the beginning." For the next hour, Jessica did. She spoke about Daniel's descent into paranoia, about Lily's drawings, about Ramirez's death. She handed over the files, her hands steady despite the fear gnawing at her. Elena listened without interruption, her expression growing grimmer with each passing minute. When Jessica finished, the journalist leaned forward. "This story will run tonight, but you need to disappear until then." Jessica shook her head. "I can't. My daughter is safer if you're not with her right now." Elena's voice was firm. "They'll use her to get to you." The truth of the words settled like a stone in Jessica's chest. She thought of Lily's small face, her quiet voice. She couldn't put her in danger. Elena slid a key across the table. "There's a safe house outside the city. Go there. Don't contact anyone." Jessica took the key, her fingers trembling. "What about Daniel?" Elena met her gaze. "When this story breaks, he'll be the least of their concerns." The words were cold comfort. Jessica stood, the weight of what was coming pressing down on her. "Thank you." Elena didn't smile. "Don't thank me yet." As Jessica turned to leave, the journalist's voice stopped her. "One more thing." Jessica looked back. Elena's expression was unreadable. "They'll come for you. Be ready." The warning hung in the air as Jessica stepped out into the hallway, the key burning a hole in her pocket. The reckoning was coming, and this time she wouldn't run. Redemption. The safe house Elena had provided was a small, weather-beaten cottage on the outskirts of a sleepy coastal town, far enough from San Diego that Jessica felt the first flickers of safety since this nightmare began. The key turned smoothly in the lock, and she stepped inside, the scent of salt and pine washing over her. She dropped her bag by the door and collapsed onto the couch, exhaustion weighing her bones like lead. The adrenaline that had kept her moving for days had finally burned out, leaving only a hollow ache. Her phone buzzed Mrs. Alvarez. Asterisk, the hearing is tomorrow, 9 a.m. They're fast-tracking Lily's case. Asterisk, Jessica's breath caught. She had less than 24 hours to prove she was fit to be Lily's mother again, to prove she wouldn't abandon her this time. But first, she needed to see Daniel. The Naval Medical Center loomed before her, its sterile white walls as imposing as the last time she'd been here. This time, though, she didn't hesitate at the entrance. She walked straight to the front desk, her back straight, her voice steady. "I'm here to see Sergeant Daniel Carter." The nurse, a different one than before, scanned her clipboard. "Are you family?" Jessica met her gaze. "I'm his wife." A lie, but not entirely. The divorce papers had never been signed. The nurse hesitated, then nodded. "Room 312. But he's not himself today." Jessica already knew that. She'd spent the last year running from the man Daniel had become. Now, she needed to face him. The hallway stretched endlessly before her, each step heavier than the last. When she reached his room, she paused outside the door, her hand hovering over the handle. What if he didn't recognize her? What if he blamed her? She pushed the door open. Daniel sat by the window, his profile silhouetted against the afternoon light. He was thinner than she remembered, his shoulders hunched, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. But his eyes, when he turned to look at her, were clearer than they'd been in months. Jessica, her name on his lips was a shock. No confusion, no anger, just quiet recognition. "You're awake," she whispered. Daniel's gaze flickered to the door behind her, then back to her face. "They lowered my dosage." His voice was rough from disuse. "The hallucinations, they're gone." Jessica stepped closer, her heart pounding. "Do you remember what happened?" A shadow crossed his face. "Enough." She didn't press. Instead, she sat in the chair beside him, the space between them charged with everything left unsaid. "I'm getting Lily back," she said finally. "There's a hearing tomorrow." Daniel's hands tightened. "You shouldn't be here. It's not safe. I know about Red Sands." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Daniel went very still. Jessica leaned forward. "I have proof, Daniel." The journalist, Elena Mendez, she's publishing the story tonight. The military won't be able to cover this up anymore. Daniel's breath hitched. For a moment, she thought he might break. Then, slowly, he reached for her hand. His fingers were warm, calloused, familiar. "You shouldn't have come back," he murmured. Jessica turned her palm up, lacing their fingers together. "I never should have left." The admission cracked something open between them. Daniel's thumb brushed over her knuckles, a silent forgiveness. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall against a window. The hearing was held in a small, stuffy courtroom, the air thick with tension. Jessica sat at the defendant's table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Across the room, a social worker whispered to the judge, casting occasional glances in Jessica's direction. Mrs. Reyes sat in the front row, Lily perched stiffly beside her. Her daughter looked smaller than Jessica remembered, her dark curls pulled into a tight ponytail, her eyes downcast. She hadn't looked at Jessica once since entering the room. The judge, a stern woman with silver-streaked hair, cleared her throat. "This hearing is to determine the custody of Lily Carter, minor child. Ms. Carter, you abandoned your child for over a year. Why should this court believe you're fit to care for her now?" Jessica stood, her knees trembling. "Your Honor, I made a mistake. But I love my daughter, and I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to be the mother she deserves." The judge's expression remained impassive. "And the father? Sergeant Carter is currently institutionalized, is he not?" Before Jessica could respond, the courtroom doors swung open. All heads turned as Daniel walked in, his posture rigid in his dress blues, his face carefully composed. The scars of the last year were still there, the shadows under his eyes, the new lines around his mouth. But he stood tall. Jessica's breath caught. Daniel moved to stand beside her, his voice steady as he addressed the judge. "Your Honor, with all due respect, my wife never stopped being Lily's mother. And I may have my struggles, but I'm getting better every day. Our family belongs together." The judge studied them for a long moment. Then she turned to Lily. "Young lady, is there anything you'd like to say?" The room fell silent. Lily hesitated, her small hands clutching the edge of the bench. Then, slowly, she stood. "I want to go home," she whispered. Jessica's vision blurred. The judge sighed, adjusting her glasses as she flipped through the files before her. Given Sergeant Carter's improved condition and Ms. Carter's demonstrated commitment to reunification, I'm inclined to grant temporary custody, pending further evaluation. Relief crashed over Jessica like a wave. She reached for Daniel's hand, his grip solid and sure beside her. Across the room, Lily finally met her eyes. And for the first time in over a year, Jessica saw hope. That night, as the rain poured outside the safe house, Jessica sat on the floor with Lily, helping her unpack the small suitcase Mrs. Reyes had packed for her. Daniel leaned against the doorway, his arms crossed, his expression soft as he watched them. Lily pulled out Mr. Bubbles, the stuffed bear Jessica had returned to her months ago, and held him close. "Is this really home now?" Jessica smoothed a hand over her daughter's hair. "For as long as you want it to be." Lily considered this, then nodded solemnly. "Okay." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was a start. Daniel pushed off the doorframe, crossing to kneel beside them. "Hey, Bug," he murmured, tapping Lily's nose. "Missed you." Lily studied him for a long moment. Searching, Jessica realized for the monsters she'd drawn in her pictures. When she didn't find them, she leaned into his side. Daniel's arms came around them both, his embrace warm and solid. Outside, the storm raged on. But for the first time in a long time, Jessica felt the pieces of her life settling back into place. Redemption, she realized, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building something new from the wreckage. A new beginning. The cottage by the sea became their sanctuary. It was small, just 2 bedrooms and a kitchen that barely fit all 3 of them at once. But it was theirs. The walls were thin, the floors creaked, and the water pressure was terrible, but none of that mattered. For the first time in over a year, they were together. Jessica stood at the kitchen window, watching the sunrise paint the ocean in shades of gold and pink. Behind her, the soft murmur of Daniel's voice carried from Lily's room, where he was helping her get ready for her first day at her new school. She could still hardly believe it. A week had passed since the custody hearing. A week of quiet dinners, of bedtime stories, of tentative laughter. It wasn't perfect. Lily still sometimes woke up crying from nightmares, and Daniel still flinched at sudden noises. But it was healing. The coffee machine gurgled, pulling her from her thoughts. She poured 2 mugs, adding sugar to one the way Daniel liked it. The floorboards creaked behind her. "She's ready," Daniel said, his voice low. Jessica turned, handing him the mug. "Nervous?" He took it with grateful nod, his fingers brushing hers. "More than I was before my first deployment." She smiled. "She'll be okay." Daniel exhaled, his gaze drifting toward Lily's door. "I know. It's just after everything." Jessica didn't need him to finish. After everything they'd put her through, the guilt still lingered. She reached for his hand. "We're here now. That's what matters." His grip tightened around hers, warm and steady. A small voice piped up from the hallway. "Are you guys being mushy again?" Lily stood there, her backpack almost as big as she was, her hair neatly braided. "Daniel's doing, judging by the slightly lopsided result." Jessica bit back a laugh. "Just making sure you have everything." "Lunchbox." Lily held it up. "Water bottle?" Another wave. "Emergency contact card?" Lily rolled her eyes. "Mom, it's in my bag." Jessica exchanged a glance with Daniel. Their little girl was growing up. "All right, let's go," Daniel said, grabbing the car keys. "Don't want to be late." The drive to the school was short, the coastal road winding past dunes and seagrass. Lily sat in the back seat, unusually quiet. Jessica turned to look at her. "You okay?" Lily fiddled with the strap of her backpack. "What if the kids don't like me?" Daniel met Jessica's eyes in the rearview mirror. "Then they're missing out," he said firmly. Jessica reached back to squeeze Lily's knee. "Just be yourself. That's more than enough." Lily nodded, but her fingers still twisted in her lap. When they pulled up to the school, the parking lot was already bustling with kids and parents. Jessica helped Lily out of the car, straightening her dress one last time. Daniel crouched in front of her. "Remember, Bug, you're a Carter, and Carters don't back down." Lily's chin lifted, just a little. "Even when we're scared?" "Especially then." She threw her arms around his neck, squeezing tight. Then, before Jessica could react, Lily turned and hugged her too, her small frame trembling slightly. "Love you," she whispered. Jessica pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Love you more." And then, with one last wave, Lily was gone, disappearing into the crowd of children. Jessica stood there for a long moment, her throat tight. Daniel's hand found hers. "She'll be okay," he murmured, echoing her words from earlier. Jessica leaned into him, watching until Lily was out of sight. They walked back to the car in comfortable silence, the weight of the morning settling between them. "So," Daniel said as he started the engine, "what now?" Jessica looked at him, really looked at him, the man who had fought his way back from hell for their family, the man she had almost lost. She smiled. "Now we live." And for the first time in a long time, the future stretched before them, bright and unbroken. 1 year later, the morning of Lily's 8th birthday dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect California day that made it hard to believe storms ever existed. Jessica stood at the kitchen counter, carefully arranging candles on a chocolate cake, Lily's favorite. The scent of sugar and vanilla filled the air, mixing with the salty breeze drifting to the open window. Behind her, the back door creaked open. "She still asleep?" Daniel asked, stepping inside with a handful of fresh eggs from a neighbor's coop. Jessica nodded, adding one last candle. "I checked on her 10 minutes ago. Out cold." Daniel set the eggs on the counter and came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Remember last year, when she woke us up at 5 in the morning?" Jessica laughed. She was so excited she forgot to take off her pajamas before putting on her birthday dress. A year. It had been a full year since they'd moved into this little house by the sea. A year of firsts. Lily's first day at her new school, Daniel's first therapy session, where he didn't flinch at loud noises, Jessica's first night of uninterrupted sleep in what felt like forever. Daniel squeezed her gently before letting go. "I got her something." Jessica raised an eyebrow as he pulled a small, clumsily wrapped box from his pocket. "You were supposed to wait until we went shopping together." "I know, but I saw it and," he shrugged, uncharacteristically shy. "Just open it." Jessica peeled back the wrapping paper to reveal a tiny silver keychain, a surfboard with Lily engraved across it. "For when she finally lets me teach her," Daniel explained, rubbing the back of his neck. "If that's okay with you." Jessica's throat tightened. There was a time when the ocean had been Daniel's enemy. The sound of waves too much like gunfire, the vastness too much like the deserts he'd fought in. But now, he wanted to share it with their daughter. She reached up, cupping his face. "It's perfect." A thump from upstairs interrupted them, followed by the sound of small feet hitting the floor at a run. Daniel grinned. "Showtime." Lily burst into the kitchen a second later, her hair a wild tangle of curls, her eyes sparkling. "I'm 8. Jessica swept her up into a hug, spinning her around. "Yes, you are." Lily giggled, squirming free only to launch herself at Daniel. "Did I grow? Do I look taller?" Daniel pretended to study her seriously. "At least 2 inches. Maybe 3. Lily beamed, then zeroed in on the cake. "Is that chocolate?" "Maybe," Jessica teased. "But you have to wait until after dinner." Lily groaned dramatically, but her protest was cut short by the doorbell. "That'll be the Alvarezes," Daniel said, heading for the door. Mrs. Alvarez had become an unexpected constant in their lives over the past year. Part babysitter, part grandmother figure, and full-time advocate for their little family. She stepped inside now, her arms laden with presents, her husband trailing behind with a tray of tamales. "Happy birthday, Mija," she said, pressing a kiss to Lily's forehead. Lily immediately began investigating the gifts, but Mrs. Alvarez caught Jessica's arm. "I have news." Jessica's stomach dropped. Even now, after everything, a part of her expected disaster. "What is it?" Mrs. Alvarez smiled. The bill passed. It took Jessica a second to understand. Then, the compensation for the Red Sands victims? Mrs. Alvarez nodded. Full medical coverage, counseling, even a formal apology from the Secretary of Defense. Jessica exhaled sharply. After Elena's explosive article had gone viral, the military had no choice but to acknowledge the illegal drug trials. The fallout had been swift: court-martials, resignations, congressional hearings. But this was justice. Daniel appeared at her side, his hand finding hers. "You did that," he murmured. Jessica shook her head. "We did that." The rest of the day passed in a blur of laughter and wrapping paper. Lily's friends from school came over, their shrieks of joy echoing off the walls as they played in the backyard. Daniel manned the grill, flipping burgers with focus usually reserved for tactical maneuvers. And Jessica watched it all, her heart so full she thought it might burst. As the sun began to set, the guests gone home and Lily tucked into bed. After 3 attempts to negotiate a later bedtime, Jessica stepped out onto the porch, where Daniel sat staring at the ocean. She sank into the chair beside him, leaning her head against his shoulder. "You okay?" He nodded, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Just thinking about how lucky I am." Jessica lifted her head to look at him. The last rays of sunlight caught the silver in his hair, the laugh lines around his eyes. The ghosts that had once haunted his gaze were quieter now, if not gone completely. She kissed him, slow and sweet. "We both are." Inside, the house was quiet, the only sound the distant crash of waves against the shore. They had survived the storm. And tomorrow? Tomorrow would be even better. The lesson: the morning after Lily's birthday. Jessica found herself standing at the edge of the shore, the cold Pacific waves lapping at her bare feet. Behind her, the cottage stood quiet, its windows glowing gold in the dawn light. Daniel was still asleep inside, and Lily, exhausted from her big day, wouldn't stir for hours yet. Jessica closed her eyes, breathing in the salt air. A year ago, she couldn't have imagined this moment. A year ago, she had been running from her past, from her mistakes, from the family she'd thought was beyond repair. A soft crunch of sand behind her made her turn. Daniel stood there, his hair sleep-tousled, 2 steaming mugs in his hands. "Thought I'd find you here," he said, handing her one. Jessica took it gratefully, the heat seeping into her fingers. "Couldn't sleep?" "Old habits." He shrugged, but the shadow that used to darken his expression at the mention of his insomnia was lighter now. Almost gone. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the waves roll in. "You ever think about how close we came to losing all this?" Daniel asked quietly. Jessica didn't answer right away. She thought of the journal hidden in her dresser drawer, the one she'd kept as a reminder of the night she'd lain awake, replaying every mistake, of the phone call that had brought her back. "Every day," she admitted. Daniel's arm slipped around her waist, pulling her close. "But we didn't lose it." No, they hadn't. Against all odds, they'd found their way back, to each other, to Lily, to this quiet, ordinary happiness that felt anything but ordinary. A sudden splash made them both turn. Lily stood knee-deep in the surf, her pajama pants rolled up, her face alight with mischief. "I'm surfing," she announced, arms outstretched as a tiny wave lapped at her legs. Daniel laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Not quite, bug." "Then teach me," Lily demanded, splashing toward them. Jessica met Daniel's eyes over their daughter's head. A year ago, the ocean had been a trigger. Now it was just home. "All right," Daniel said, setting his mug aside. "Lesson 1, you gotta learn to stand first." As Jessica watched them, Daniel patiently guiding Lily's stance, their laughter carrying on the wind, she realized something. Second chances weren't about erasing the past. They were about building something new from the broken pieces, about showing up day after day, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. Lily's triumphant shout rang out as she managed a balance for a full 3 seconds before tumbling into the shallows. Daniel hauled her up, both of them dripping and grinning. Jessica joined them, the water cool around her ankles, This was what mattered, not the mistakes they'd made, but what they'd chosen to do after. The sun rose higher, painting the waves in gold, and for the first time in a long time, Jessica didn't look back. She only looked forward. If this story of resilience and redemption moved you, do us a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe for more real-life transformations, and share this with someone who needs to hear that second chances are possible. Because everyone deserves a comeback story. See you in the next video.